Leo, I'm so happy to have you on board the transatlantic. I'm about to cross like one hell of a ocean. I already know that. So thank you so much, man. So I would say let's go through the Seven Seas interview, and hopefully we can give like a side of you that many people don't know. Okay, are you ready?
I'm ready. Nice to meet you, Simona.
Okay, good. First question. I do not know what I might appear to the world, but to myself, I seem to have been only like a boy playing on the seashore, diverting myself in and out, finding a smoother pebble or a prettier shell than ordinary, whilst the great ocean of truth lay all undiscovered before me. Now, I'm not sure where I read these words, but the funny thing is actually they resurface from the pocket of one of my motorcycle jackets. So I thought of serving them to you, to your 29-year-old Leo, playing on the day on the beach, the day that you found, like, you know, Johannes Leonardo. Were you only a young guy playing on the seashore, or you had a clear idea of why you were there, why you were founding that agency, and what you wanted to do next?
Well, firstly, what sort of motorbike?
Oh my God, I'm a big Harley Davidson fan, and have 3 Harley Davidson. I'm going for a 4-1 for the joy of my wife, that say like, why do you need 4 motorcycles? You always need 4 motorcycles, right? Why not?
Yeah, as someone who doesn't have any, that will absolutely. It sounds like someone needs to cross your ocean, Simona. It's interesting. It's, you know how, and you probably feel the same way, that when you look at people you admire, you always feel that they must have had such a clear idea about what they wanted to do from a young age, that they were this prodigy who had this crystal clear vision of who they were going to be. And the more you get to know someone, the more you realize that it's a journey all the time. You know what I mean? It's these little shores, to take your analogy, that you arrive on each time, and there's always new realizations and new discoveries on that way. And certainly when we were just talking about my relationship with my parents earlier, and certainly every time I left the shore, I would always be promising my mum I'd be back in 6 months or a year, and inevitably that's 15, 20 years ago now. But yeah, looking back to when I was 29, I started the agency when I was 29, and I just, it's then it was the only thing that I could have done. Do you know what I mean? Because I always had this, I think we are the product of our upbringing in our childhoods, and I always had this need to go and explore, and I mean that both in the geographical sense, but also just internally, to try and discover who I was and what I wanted to do. But it was at that point in my career, I was helping to run the creative department at Saatchi at the time. I couldn't imagine anything else other than diving in the deep end and giving, starting my own agency a go. Mm-hmm. Although when I look back now, I think you're absolutely crazy to do that at 29. You know what I mean? Right. But it was the only thing that I could have done. And I think it's so important that you always follow what you're passionate about, and what you love, and that you allow yourself to make those mistakes. And certainly in so many ways, I feel like my education and my learning in the industry only started then. Because I was just exposed to so much as a creative person. I got exposed to my clients firsthand, to business problems, to helping to run a business. And it was looking back, I go, oh my God, there was so much I didn't know. But at the same time, in an equal ratio, it was the only thing that I could have done.
It's so interesting you say that. It was the only thing I could have done. I just finished reading the Chronicles, Volume 1 by Bob Dylan. And there is actually one part in the book where he explained the lucidity of destiny. and he says like, before starting my journey into the music industry, there was a moment in time where I felt that destiny was looking just at me and nobody else. But somehow my next step were so clear, even though nothing was planned, that there was nothing else I could have done other than what I did.
Yeah.
And I think like this kind of like recur in many people that had like a brilliant career. I mean, again, you say yourself, 29 years old to even open an agency. I can't even fathom, man. Like I started working at 26.
Well,
like,
we had 0 clients, so I'll put that in perspective a little bit.
Doesn't
But
matter.
I think I remember that moment that you talk about with Dylan. I think there was a moment. I don't know who the musician, but he went to see someone at a very young age, and he felt that he had this connection with the folk musician that was on stage at that time, and he whether that was for him something that was completely self-indulgent and he read a lot into or not, it was just being able to listen to yourself and place importance on what you wanted to do, knowing that, I don't know, I guess it's all a risk, right? We might be horribly inept, but worst thing is not to give it a go in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Second question. Talking about music, and we are talking about Joy Division. Young Curtis, the genial frontman of English band Joy Division, could seldom afford to purchase records, leading him to frequently steal records from local shops. By his mid-teens, Jan had a collection of albums where the name of Iggy Pop and David Bowie and Jim Morrison stood among the others. Now, the act of stealing became an act of feeding Jan's creative soul. Now, if you were to steal from someone in the advertising industry, who would you be stealing from and what you would be stealing?
Well, to be honest, I really like your crossing oceans. The next time in a pitch, I'm going to ask the client if I can cross their ocean. That's still from you, Simone. No, you know what? As a creative, what I really get a lot from is not so much stealing the output, but the process. Do you know what I mean? Because I think as you're growing up in this industry, self-doubt enters the equation so often, right? You don't really have the tools in which to create. You know, you can see something, but the distance between getting the problem and then that sort of, irrelevant of what the creative output is such a big distance, and there's a curtain and it's an entire mystery. So I really love the getting under the skin of how people creators that I love actually create. And I'm talking about things like when you hear Aaron Sorkin talk about the process of writing, you know what I mean? And he's completely upfront that even someone as phenomenal as he is, the blank page and writer's block, and how you just have to come to accept it because it happens to everyone. And then there's but there's just so many. If you take the moment that even Banksy had that realization that if he's going to be able to create the work that he wanted to do, then he needs to do it through stencil, because that's going to enable him to get it on a wall and be out of there before he gets found, by the police, that in time to create the work that he wanted. So I just love hearing these stories of how musicians, Leonard Cohen with the learning the 4 chords, and that was all he felt like he needed to do on the ukulele, how informative that was. Stanley Kubrick and Barry Lyndon and the lighting techniques and the lack of lighting in that, and just using more natural lighting. My favorite film genre of all time is neorealism. I know Vittorio De Sica didn't create it, but he was just the camera coming out of the studio and roaming real life at the time in post-war Italy, and the sort of films that then led to. I just love that's what I steal from is the obstacles and the processes that the artists that I love end up deploying, because I think then you sort of, it gives you your own tools that it's up to you to decide how you want to use them.
And also, I think the process, when you look at the process of some of the greatest, as you mentioned, it kind of makes you feel closer to them, because there is some kind of basic that everybody has to go through, right? You say Aaron Sorkin. I watched like the masterclass of Aaron Sorkin, and I do remember like him talking extensively about like the creative process. But even like, you know, I'm a big fan of the writing in movie, like a Pulp Fiction, Quentin Tarantino. And Quentin Tarantino like has a handwriting like process, right? He doesn't type, he just handwrite. And there are many writers like, you know, like James Elroy, for instance, like they only use a pen and a sheet of paper. And that kind of like make you feel like, okay, then everybody can do it. You can really see the genius of these people because they have the same tools that you have. All you need is like a pen and paper or a camera, like, you know, and somehow I myself find very like, you know, reassuring to follow the process of these people, because make me feel that everything is possible somehow.
Exactly what you say. It's, you realize that they share the same struggles. It's just the way that they reacted to those. And suddenly things feel like so much more achievable. And I think that's the key thing, is like, for when you're a young creative in advertising, that's the big unlock in so many ways, is just the realization that if you love this thing enough, right, that everyone that you admire has those same struggles. And it's just about, you know, continuing to learn and continuing in many ways not to give up.
Awesome, man. Third question. Here's a fact that sounds grossly impossible, but it's not that far-fetched. The world's ocean could be virtually empty, completely empty by 2048. A study shows that if nothing changes, we will run out of seafood in 2048. Now, if we want to preserve the ecosystem of the sea, we need to change. Let's bridge this to advertising and use this fact to lay the question. What's the thing that the advertising industry could run out of if we don't change, if we don't address it in the next 5 years?
That's a super question. What's your take? I'm very interested in yours.
My take is, oh man, it's like, it's an open-ended question to me, because I've been actually talking extensively to my peers, and like, you know, what I do know, and I came to a full realization, is like, it's a totally different game that I was playing even like 3 years ago. Has different rules and has different, like, you know, standards. So the game has changed, and there is like almost like a crossroad where either you are in the game or you're out of the game, but there are different rules. What I think we could run out of if we don't feed ourselves is creativity, which is like the most important commodity that we sell. But creativity needs to be fed, and creativity needs to be fed by inputs that arrive from the outside world. But there is a tendency to live completely isolated because of the pandemic, because of like the technology. And this makes our creativity dry. The metaphor I have is like, creativity should be like a beautiful plump, like, you know, grape. But there is a danger that it become a raisin, completely dry out.
I agree. I agree that the things that are at the heart of creativity feel like we got to watch out that they don't become neglected.
Yeah.
You know, like the time that we have on things, the inspiration, you know, where we get our stimulus as creative people, and just placing value on that in the first place. There's a lot of things with all how expectations are increasing that seem to go against all the things that are vital to creativity thriving, you know. So I completely agree with that. I think that's super important. I think the other thing for me is to watch out is how we choose to measure ourselves, because ultimately, however somebody chooses to measure themselves determines how they act, right? And what they do and what we sort of go after. And we are increasingly able to sort of measure short-term success. We're increasingly able to sort of measure the effectiveness of programmatic work. We're increasingly, award shows are in themselves a measure. And I think the good fight that we have as an industry is to continue to prove the massive difference. And I really believe in this, the massive difference that the intangible, the power of a long-term idea can have on a company. Do you know what I mean? And I think that's the thing that we need to make sure that we're protecting and continuing to prove out, so that the value that agencies can provide is seen and understood, right? Because that goes hand in hand with the reverence and the respect for the creative process in itself.
No, that's a super interesting point. Absolutely. I think like the standards, the way also because also we are an industry that doesn't have tools to analyze our process long term. It seems like that's we do live on a short-term base, where there are other industry where they have analyzing tools and they have best products for long term. They learn more. We have like a long-term memory problem, and so everything happened in the moments and it's contained in the moments.
That's why I always think that the best combination is to get those short, to get those wins in the immediate, right? Yeah. But at the same time, what is that headline that you're grabbing, or the point you've made? How is that reinforcing what this brand is about in culture?
Yeah.
And I think you kind of need to do both at the same time. And we've seen, you've probably seen a ton of examples. For us, the closest one is the impact of the work that we've done on Adidas Originals over the last 7 years. Is getting that combination right has just led to enormous business growth, right? And when we do our jobs well, advertising, creativity can be the most powerful business tool still that companies have.
Right. You mentioned that, and then I go into the next question. But before that, not because you are right in front of me. That was a hell of a campaign, what you guys did. But to me personally, I think when I saw the very first installments, it was beautifully shot. But what really got me was the line, original is never finished.
Yeah.
And it's funny because the very, very first time I saw the first piece of content coming out, I just let it sink. I didn't want to think about it, but then there was this line coming back at me, original never finished. So I would say, for instance, I remember one day I was watching Sid Vicious, singing My Way, Sid Vicious, right? The performance. And somehow, because I think is in the, I don't know if I remember, one piece is the soundtrack. Somehow this line came back to me again. And then there was, right now, the film Dune is so much on the screen.
I haven't seen it yet, but yes.
Right? And they come back again, this line. I don't know. I thought just let me tell you, man, whoever wrote the line, such a great insight. And I think that what made me really excited about advertising, when you don't just write a line or thoughts, you really have a solid piece of thinking that whenever it's put out there in the universe, at least for people like me, it keep coming back into my life, even if
you see your experience in life reinforce that brand point of view. And I think that's exactly, that campaign was really the third year of us putting out that point of view that try and take down obstacles on behalf of creators. That's really what it was. We started, obviously starting with the notion of superstardom, and then the second year was all about, taking back that the future's not yours, and then obviously the third year was when we got to the original It's Never Finished campaign that you just touched on.
Beautiful. 4 questions. So we talk about Bob Dylan. In fact, this question is about Bob Dylan, the Chronicles. And as I say, I've been sailing this ocean, it's quite a stormy ocean. Bob is not an easy mind to go through. That says something in the book fascinated me to a point that I had to work into our conversation. So during the recording session, there were a couple of songs that Bob Dylan couldn't really complete. They belong to, I think, that album Ring Them Bell. And he stayed the whole day trying to finish this song, but he couldn't. So he left the studio and he went to watch a movie. And the movie happened to be the movie Homeboy, the 1988 drama written by Mickey Rourke and starring Mickey Rourke as a boxer and Christopher Walken as a co-star. And truly, I know that a new generation probably only know a side of Mickey Rourke that is the most shallow side, but he's a hell of an actor. And back in the day was was one of the actors that defined a generation, to the point that Bob Dylan was so inspired by the performance of Mickey Rourke in this Homeboy that came back right away without even talking to his bandmates. He completed the work. He completed a song. Now, my question for you is this. Has it ever happened to you that you got stuck solving a problem, a creative problem? You couldn't go anywhere. And then you just did something else, watch a movie, read a book, and something triggered your mind that you were able so vividly to go back to the piece of work where you stuck on and just complete it right away.
It's fascinating. I think it's a lot to do. What you're talking about is really the myth around ideas and how we have ideas, because I think there's this perception that ideas come out of nowhere and then suddenly you have this light bulb moment and 100% of the idea is formed. And for me personally, that's never really how it happens. It's always about something's in your mind, right? And it's been there for however long. Then something new enters, and it's about these two dots joining. It's about these two moments coming together. And I remember being a young creative, and I was an intern in an agency in Australia, and I was so keen to impress, and I'd always try to be working to come up with the idea. I remember my boss said, "Go and just get out and go and do something else." And to me, it sounded horribly unproductive at the time. Mm-hmm. But that experience that he had was completely right. You know what I mean? And I think there's a couple of examples that come to mind, when that's specifically happened for me. One is, I remember again being a young creative in Australia, and just feeling like the work that I wanted to make, I couldn't get it outside the agency, let alone in front of a client. Okay. And I remember feeling frustrated, and then I saw this piece of work from New Zealand, right? Not very far away. And it was basically, imagine it was a street drain, right? Just a drain in a street, and someone had painted a mural around the drain, so that the drain formed the mouth of the sea creature. Mm-hmm. And it just said, "Poison the sea, poison me." Oh, okay. And it was saying that, whatever you put down the drain is gonna affect our wildlife. Right. And I remember looking at it and feeling the simplicity of it, the accessibility of an idea like that, and just going, if you have a great idea, nothing can get in the way of it, right? Because you could go and make something like that happen. So that was a moment for me where I went, okay, I'm going to challenge myself to try and come up with something that there aren't a lot of layers needed to get that idea out in the world, right? I think another example is when we were working on the Volkswagen pitch right? This is a couple of years ago. And we knew we had to, this was an automotive company, you know, the biggest automotive company going through a major transition, right? From, you know, gas cars to electric. So we needed an idea that was really going to help with this transition over the long term. That was the immediate task, but we in the back of our minds was the need to make sure that we were clearing the air with the consumer, right? Because this is, you know, three years after Dieselgate, and still a lot of that reconnection needed to happen with the American consumer. So that was always in our mind as something to address. And I don't know how, you know, maybe a few days before the final pitch, I heard the Simon and Garfunkel song, "Hello Darkness," and it was maybe just the first verse into it, and suddenly that the way to do it came to mind. You know what I mean? I could just see the entire film, and the using of I just got really excited about the film that would be literally set in darkness. You know what I mean? Like, so much of the screen would be black for so often, right? And that there was a way to make what, you know, they'd been through as a company, something that we've all been through in some regard, right? Like moments where that we felt alone and we had to struggle. And I think music is always a massive source of inspiration for me personally. And from the very first commercial that we did as an agency, we stole from Damn Boots, right? Damn Boots was the song that we created. It was an original piece of music, but it was really inspired by that gospel track, Dem Bones, right? The knee bone is connected to the.
It's so beautiful, man.
It was riffing off that, you know what I mean? And that's happened. We've done that so often through the course of the agency.
I ask you because, like, you know, you're right. It's the process of like coming up with ideas, and sometimes it's so magnificently, so profoundly, like, you know, almost romantic. Like, you know, you are listening to the music of Hello Darkness, which, by the way, was composed. I remember that song was composed, like, you know, I think in someone's bathroom or something like this. So maybe it was another song about Paul Simon. But anyway, sometimes just random. I remember, like, for instance, like, you know, I was part of this huge campaign, like, called like Hostile Takeover for Activision. At the time, I KQA San Francisco was like a true team effort, and we won the Gold Lion. But I remember, like, at the time, like, there was my boss that asked me, like, we were supposed to name this Activision thing, these stunts, and so I remember I was on paternity leave, and he sent me a text message says, like, hey, do you have a name for it? And I remember at that time, this is so weird. I was reading about Martin Sorrell style of business. One of the things that Martin Sorrell was very famous, it was like hostile takeover, which is like a way of coming in very aggressively and buy a company, which probably means what he did. Like, and at that time I was reading about this style of business, which is so foreign to me because I really don't, like, you know, I'm not a manager, but somehow in that time of my life, I was reading about that. And I was like, yeah, and I thought that it would fit completely the type of stunt that we're trying to do. And so I say, yeah, hostile takeover. And so it's funny now, every time, like, I see that campaign, which was, again, like a team effort, like I just play a role in that. But every time I see the title.
But sometimes it comes from a very unlikely source.
Exactly.
Like, right? I mean, who would have thought that's going to lead you to, right, a creative idea like that? But that's the sort of, it's, I think it's things like that force you to go into an original space.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Anyway, fifth question. The chemical formula of water, H2O, indicate that each of its molecules contain one oxygen and two hydrogen atoms. So water is an inorganic, transparent, tasteless, odorless, and nearly colorless chemical substance, yet it's vital for all our forms. Now, if you were to follow this analogy through the corridors of your company, Johannes Leonardo, and carry it with you as you with every employee of your company. What is the vital thing, like water, that you guys need to survive?
It's yeah. Great questions, man. Great questions. The vital thing we need to survive. I mean, look, if it had to come down to one word, it's passion. Do you know what I mean? I really, it's interesting that I just think that you need to do what you're passionate about, only because no matter what you choose to do, it's never going to be a completely easy path, right? You're always going to come up against obstacles, right? That require resilience, or being able to bounce back. And unless you've got passion there to begin with, you're not going to have the energy to overcome those moments, right? And I think that's why, I don't know, for me, that's the most important thing. I remember reading something, I don't know where I was reading it, but if you take a famous footballer's brain, like if you take Neymar's brain and you cut it in half versus someone who's not as good as him, right? And there's probably going to be around Neymar's brain there's sheets of myelin which surrounds the neurons, is probably going to be much thicker, right? Which means the inputs and outputs happen much more quickly. And that's because every time he hit a challenge, he overcame it. And every time you do that, a sheet of myelin forms around the neuron. And that comes from doing that so many times, means that you've got a love for that thing, and you're going to continue to do it. So it's what I was saying earlier. I think for me, it always has to start from a place of love or passion for what you choose to do, which is why it's more important to choose something that you're passionate about than it is to choose something that you feel capable in, because you can get to the capability part.
It's interesting. Another thing that made me think, like, that lead me, like, now you say passion, but also, like you were mentioning, that's how, in order to grow, you need to somehow go through breaks, right? The breaking like system. And it's something that actually is so embedded in our lives. So if you go to the gym, right, the way the muscle grow because when you go to the gym, you break the fiber. And when you rest, the fiber of your muscle come back again, but they don't come back equally. They come back like this, one on top of each other. And that gives like the growth. Now that's anatomically. If you bring this into like your everyday life, right? In order to grow, you need to break things. You need to truly overcome obstacle. You need to go through a breaking process. So without a breaking process, it's impossible for you to grow. And I always thought that it was we just need to look at ourselves anatomically sometimes to understand, oh, okay, that's how I grow then. I can break things,
The breaking process is feeling challenged, being open to challenges and not being frightened by and going for it.
Anyway, man. Okay, this question. There is a point in the Pacific Ocean known as Point Nemo, point on no one, named after the famous submarine sailor from Jules Verne, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Is the worst, most lonely place and the hardest to reach location on planet Earth. It's also a spacecraft cemetery. Over 100 decommissioned spacecraft machines are thought to lay underneath there. Now, if you were to travel to Point Nemo and you had to take one thing from your office desk, I know you're at home now, but if you are at your office, just one thing and bring it to Point Nemo, you are 1,000 miles away from civilization, what would that be?
I'm actually in the office. The problem is we've just moved, so I have nothing sort of
that's beautiful.
That's not in boxes that's worth taking. But from memory, from memory, alcohol would probably be a good thing to take. Although
that's awesome.
I've got an empty champagne bottle that we that I have from the moment that
Love it.
we started working with Adidas, in 2015, I think it was, just as a, maybe that, although it's empty, so it wouldn't serve a purpose, but a reminder of, being able to sort of beat the odds, right? But I don't know, I think creative people, it's like you can be alone, you can be in the middle of nowhere, and you can feel undoubtedly deeply connected to humanity just through the way our minds work. So I just give myself as many excuses like a blank pad, and
Right.
I love a blank pad and coffee, and then obviously all the photos of the family that I can muster. That would be.
Hey, look, this is the last question that we have for our guest. If there was a wind that blew your sail, and you had to come up with a name for the wind, what would the name be?
Go all the way. Just like
All the way. Love it, man.
Applied by Charles Bukowski.
Yeah. Oh my God. That's what I say. Whenever people mention Charles Bukowski, I have his thumbstone tattoo here with the words like "never try." I can tell you an infinite story about him because I used to live in Redondo Beach, and that's where Charles Bukowski had his last readings. He's also buried in Palos Verdes. It's like at a cemetery. So I would go every month to pay him respect. And but yeah, go all the way. It's such a beautiful motto in life. It's great.
It's a creative motto, and so much of his. I mean, not just poets, but songwriters, and I think that's. I find it so inspiring because what they do is they distill things down, right, to the things that stay in your mind and help you, right, at times when you're going through stuff that you need that help with.
Leo, thank you so much for being on board of Transatlantic. It was a fantastic journey for me, and I wish all the best to you, Johannes, Leonardo, your family, everybody, man. Really, thank you.
Man, it was a pleasure for me. It was more of a pleasure for me. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you, man. Bye-bye.
Thank you, man.